computer game theme tune which became a song, which became a 53-minute long progressive rock extravaganza. I'm going to talk to you about the Regression Suite. The Regression Suite at the moment is the latest album I've recorded, and it's a 53-minute long progressive monster. But it's also the first album that I've actually uploaded onto YouTube, on my YouTube channel that you're looking at now. And you can listen to it there as well as on Bandcamp. And so I thought it would be a really good opportunity to talk about the album just a little bit and to tell you about what I was thinking when I wrote it and where it came from and all of that stuff. So back in about the year 2000, when I'd first moved to Wellington, I was going through a lot of things to do with kind of moving from one place to another, and found myself in situations where I was outside of support networks. I didn't have the same support networks I had when I was living in Taranaki. And so finding myself in this place, a lot of kind of crazy things happened where I wasn't able to fully deal with them. And I would often be struck by feeling trapped in certain circumstances, trapped and feeling like that whenever I tried to move beyond them, I kept regressing back into the same field, regressing back into the same kind of ideas. And in about that time, about midway through the year, some stuff happened to me which you don't need to know about, which really caused me a significant amount of distress at that time. And without having support networks and without having people around me in the same kind of way that I did previously, I found myself sort of struggling with it. And one of the things that I had learnt to do was to, whenever I was struggling, turn it to music. And so what I did is I started to turn this feeling into a song. And the song became Regression, which is the first track of the album. And at that stage when I wrote that song, it was just a song by itself, and I had no idea how it was going to progress. If I rewind back to my childhood days, I used to play a lot of the Commodore 64. Commodore 64 computers, it was awesome. And there was one particular game, Microprose Soccer, and on it was a theme tune, and the theme tune sounds a little like this. Written by Martin Galway, who wrote the music for this, and this particular theme song, it must have gotten into my head and stuck there at some point, because when I turned around and started to write the Regression song, I somehow managed to take this riff from the back of my memory, without even realising I was doing it, take it from the back of my memory and to put it into this particular song. And so the riff becomes this. Thanks to my friend Mark's input and all of the music that we had been playing up until that time, I was really starting to push myself to learn different rhythms and different timings. And so you will listen to the Regression song and hear it's in a 5-beat, that's the main part of the song, whereas the choruses are in a 7, and I keep jumping between 5s and 7s. And it was a really interesting song for me to write, because it was one of the first times I'd really started playing around with these different ideas. Big huge rock track, but it's a 5-beat, then jumping into a 7 because I really liked the way that it floated. But the whole song feels jarring, and the reason is because I was feeling jarred in that situation. It was an extraordinary journey for me musically, but also it allowed me to get these feelings out, these regression feelings out. But at this stage, it's just one song. At this stage, I only had the idea to actually take that song, turn it into one thing, and that was it. Yay, done. However, the next year I found myself in a situation which was markedly similar to what I'd been in the year before, and I was dealing with some of the same things, and I felt myself regressing back into that feeling, regressing back into what had previously happened. And being someone that really likes the way stories kind of fold into each other, that kind of mythopia kind of idea of myth making, I really wanted to actually take the song Regression and to move it forward and to go into it a bit more. And I began writing Regression 2, and I was very purposely at that stage writing a part 2 to my part 1. I had no intent to go any further. It was just, well, I'm feeling this feeling again, it's time to push that a bit further. And so I took the same riff, I took the same feel, but rather than have the big full all-out rock, I pulled the overall song back into something a little bit more floating and more relaxed. still, however, trying to deal with that 5-beat, that feeling that something was jarring. And so that Regression 2, the song was born. And lyrically, it seems to follow on a lot from what was happening in the first song. Musically, it is dealing with things in a bit of a different way. You can hear that riff constantly going throughout. So it's like I'm still, no matter where I'm going, I'm still dealing with what's going on. And that became Regression 2, and it was meant to be kind of the second and final part to the song. There wasn't supposed to be a third one. In the year 2000, around that time, I was listening to a lot of Dream Theater, and Dream Theater being a big progressive metal monster band, they were doing a lot of things that I was really interested in. I was really interested in the different time signatures and the different ways they try and communicate musical ideas. And they did an album in about 2001, I think, which was called 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence. And on 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence, there was one track called The Glass Prison, and The Glass Prison straight away grabbed my attention. I really just loved the story, I loved the music. It's kind of to this day still my favourite song ever. But the thing that was really key about that song is it was the one song had 3 parts to it, and those 3 parts were the start of what Dream Theater were calling their Alcoholics Anonymous Suite. And that was going to be, across the next 4 or 5 albums, they were going to put out the next few parts. And over the next 5 albums they did, and they put out 12 parts of the song, and if you listen to it, it's a 57-minute long song, and it's absolutely beautiful, and it tells this one unified story while having some of the same riffs kind of feeding through. And that must have been a huge influence for me. I can't quite specifically remember it, but I feel like that must have been a massive influence for me, because I really liked this idea of telling a story across multiple albums, telling a story through multiple threads, both musically and lyrically, and trying to create one big movement. Okay, so we fast forward to 2006 and we find ourselves in a place where all the stuff that happened in 2000 and 2001 is a long time ago. I now have support networks, I've got people that are journeying with me and looking after me, so I'm in a really different space. But I actually found that I was working with some people. I was doing youth work at the time, and I was working with some people, and they were starting to experience things that weren't working well for them, and you walk alongside them and you help them out as best you can. But one of the situations with one of the students actually caused me to remember the stuff that I was going through in that time, and some of the feelings were very similar. And so I looked at it and I thought, wow, isn't this really interesting that the same feeling is there? I wonder if I could turn this into a third song to do with the regression progression. Can I say that? I can, I have. And I thought, what a fascinating idea to take this. So I took the 2 songs, Regression 1, Regression 2, looked at some of the elements I really want to try and play around with, and then Regression 3 was created, this hugely angsty movement of music where big brutal riffs, and it's more about me demanding of someone that they need to be careful, they need to look out for things that are going on, and me trying to warn them about things that I'd already experienced. And at this point, Regression 3 with a little 3 above it, so it looks like it's Aliens 3 because I was watching a lot of the Aliens movies at the time. The thing that's really purposeful about what I'm trying to do with that song is I actually felt like the story was growing. There was things happening in that story that was really interesting. So that was probably the first time that I looked at it and thought, hang on a second, I've got these songs, I've got these ideas, I've got this kind of journey. And then I'm also thinking about Dream Theater and the way that they did this thing. Maybe my regression can become the Regression Suite. Maybe I can write a bunch of songs. And so I set about starting to create my own magical piece of music. This idea of 12 songs, which I intended to release across different albums because I thought that'd be a really fun way to do it. And that became the Regression Suite. Okay, so now things start to move very fast, because around the 2006 to 2009 era I was doing a lot of youth work, and at that time I had my instruments and things all set up in my office at the church I was working at, and so I was able to, in downtime, to be able to just throw some musical ideas together. And so I started writing a lot. I started being really focused about how I was writing, and that started off being an amazing thing. I did some really great music around that time, starting to think about some really awesome things. And so there were a number of songs that came out of that, and looking at the Regression Suite, there's a number of those first few songs that are really a big part of that. And the next number of songs came out of that time. Because I was writing so much in that time, I pretty much, with a couple of exceptions, pretty much wrote the entire album over the next few years and started to think about how they were going to work and write them on my little songbook as to how the movements were going to change. And I started giving them names, and I started to think about this grand journey. And I didn't necessarily have a journey at that stage. I was just really throwing ideas at a page, and it ended up becoming this template for where I was going to go with the Regression Suite album. So musically it was great fun. Musically I was able to start trying different things and trying different ideas and seeing how I could make them work. But lyrically I was kind of struggling a little bit because I was manufacturing things, and this actually speaks to a wider problem that I began to have. While 2006, 2007, maybe even 2008, I was writing lots of stuff and it was really fun and exciting. End of 2008, start of 2009, I started to feel like I was manufacturing things in my own head, in my own way of thinking, which caused me to write these grand musical statements. But I was focusing so much more inside and on the stuff that was happening in here that I stopped focusing on where my focus should be elsewhere, and all in an effort to write grand musical statements. And I actually found myself sort of stumbling a little bit, and so some of the early lyric drafts of the Regression Suite, they're actually a little bit hard for me to read because I read them and sort of think, oh gosh, my thinking was in the wrong space at that point. But when I sat down over the last year or so looking to re-record this and redo the whole thing, I started recreating this lyrical story in my head and starting to look at how I was going to shape this into the life that I now lead, the life that I've actually sort of come to through these years. And I started to identify these problems I had with forcing myself to regress into things that aren't so good, and actually moving myself forward into these better ideas. And so the album is all about that. I start with this idea of regression, this idea of looking inward, looking at my own things and not really paying attention to the wider world or the people around me, and then transitioning through and looking to progress. And that's where the next part of the album goes. Transition is a song which speaks to that speaks to that idea of me moving through, and you can kind of hear musically in it that I'm trying to move through into different ideas. Progression is a beautiful track which actually the end piece to it I had written back in the early 90s when I was first starting to teach myself how to write songs, so that comes from way back then. But taking the regression riff, putting it into an 8-beat and putting it into a major key and trying to run it in a particular kind of way, and then to create this Jimi Hendrix-y kind of If I Only Could style song, where I was allowing it to just be very cut back and very simple, not the massive overdubbing I usually do, and trying to push myself into a faith-inspired progression. Second Transition is a short instrumental that actually I wrote in the last few years, where I knew that I needed to kind of move the front half of the album to the second half of the album, the first and the second, and it was a little riff I'd been playing around with, and I thought, why not just expand it to like a minute and a half and add some different sounds in it and try and see if I can move it through. It was really fun to do, to try and glue these pieces together. And then we get to Transgression. Transgression is a song that's dear to my heart because of all of these songs. It was the first one I recorded back in 2012 when I was looking to do the Y3K Part 1 album, which I'll talk to you about another time. Transition was the first track on that album, and the lyrics of it are really inspired by, in 2009 I read through the Book of Romans, and the Book of Romans, at that time I'd read it before but hadn't really paid as much attention to it as perhaps I could have, and then when I read it this time in about 2009, it changed me significantly. The way I kind of viewed faith and the way I kind of viewed my own journey, and it had a huge fundamental change, which essentially is what the Y3K Part 1 album is about. but Transgression itself, the song, I had borrowed it from the Regression Suite and put it into Y3K Part 1, and I kind of felt that there was a one sort of set of songs going this way and another one kind of intersecting it, and it was like a progressive album, and then there was tying onto another one, so everything's all linked, which is the kind of thing I like to do. But Transgression was a really fun song. I recorded all the music except for the drums, and then I sent it to my brother and said, do what you can with this. And he gave me, to this day, probably my favourite drum track of his. The Transgression drum track is completely out of sight. And yeah, the song was so powerful and it kind of pushed me forward. In fact, probably with all my music, Transgression's the one that kind of really ignited me to go forward to what I'm doing now. Second Transgression is a small instrumental which is based on First Transgression, and it also comes from the Y3K Part 1 album. And in both of those, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to understand what it looks like when I'm not doing the things I need to be doing, when I'm not looking after myself, or I'm not looking after the people around me, and perhaps I'm kind of, just not treating myself or other people with the respect they deserve. And that's an exploration of that, and it's also looking at how the theology and the ideas behind the Book of Romans changes that for me. Fast forward another couple of years and I released Y3K Part 2, and Y3K Part 2 had a song in the middle of it called Trepidation, which I had, like I had with Y3K Part 1, I borrowed a song from the Regression Suite to put into that album. And Trepidation, when it first began its life, I think lyrically it's changed the most out of all the songs from when I first wrote it. And when I was re-recording it for the Y3K Part 2 album, I needed to make it, one, fit with the theme of that mini album, but also I really needed to update it to where I was and how I was going. So the Y3K Part 2 was essentially about, I read the book Love Wins by Rob Bell, nice and controversial, just put that out there, and there were a lot of elements in that story which really changed the way I thought about the world and about people and about faith, and it was a hugely influential book for me. And if you look at the lyrics to Y3K Part 2, you may understand kind of what that meant for me. But Trepidation is about me being able to turn over the responsibility of things that are happening in other people's faith journeys, turn that over so it's not something that I'm dragging with me. And my responsibility is not to go and change people and do all these crazy things, but it's to me to be myself and to do the things that I know I need to be doing to be respecting other people. And so Trepidation's a little bit about that, about me sort of learning to let go and to actually love better, if that makes sense. And just because I can, in 2018 I did another concept album called Ocean of Dreams, and the second track in Ocean of Dreams is a track called The Fourth Regression, which also purposely was taken from the Regression Suite to be put into the Ocean of Dreams album. And it's called The Fourth Regression because it is me going back to Regression 1, 2 and 3 from the first 3 tracks of the album and looking at those things that were happening and identifying that feeling and then putting that feeling to bed. It's like looking at that idea of regression and sort of saying, no, that's it, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm not that person anymore. I can look at this and I can see how destructive that is. I'm just not going to go there. And so musically there's a lot of themes that I bring throughout the whole album. There's a whole lot of themes that kind of keep coming back. There's that same riff, thank you Martin Galway, that same riff that keeps coming back in different ways and different styles, but there's also a few other things I bring in. And in the Fourth Regression there's a few things, like there's the C minor scale riff. Anyway, maybe that a few of these different riffs that kind of come back and sort of flying over top of each other, and it's all part of the same journey. But the thing that I really liked about the Fourth Regression is not only did it start the Ocean of Dreams with such an incredible punch, lyrically and musically it's a really strong song by itself, full song I think, and I just really enjoyed recording it. Okay, so in 2019 when I first started looking at recording the Regression Suite as its own album, I already had 6 songs recorded. I already had Regression and Regression 2 recorded because I did those for the Achilles album. they're not. I didn't write. I'll talk about that another time. So Regression 1 and 2 had already been recorded. Transgression and Second Transgression for Y3K Part 1, Trepidation for Y3K Part 2, and the Fourth Regression for Ocean of Dreams. So there were only 6 other songs that I needed to do, and so I very hurriedly recorded Regression 3, Transition, Progression, huge 1, 2, 3 to do there, and then Second Transition was a very short instrumental that was very easy to do. Then I got to Reincarnation, and Reincarnation was a song that what I wanted to do was to musically try and tie everything up. I'll talk about that in a second. But lyrically also to be able to put everything to bed and to be able to move into something new. And there's 2 things I do with this song, which is a big part of the whole album. Lyrically, what I am doing in this is I'm talking about this idea of reincarnation, and there's a speech at the end done by my friend Darth Jim. I love you, Jim. I love you. There's a speech at the end which sums up everything, and that is that in my view, please, reincarnation is about this idea that in your own life you have different times that you are different versions of you. It's still your life, birth, death, and it's not coming back as a turtle or like or something like that, but it's the idea that actually you have the opportunity to recreate yourself, to reincarnate yourself to a new version of you. So you've learned, you've grown, you've become something new. And so that was what I was trying to get at this idea of reincarnation, that throughout this song I am reincarnated again and again and again, and I get to the end and I'm a new incarnation of myself. I'm reincarnated as me, a person that's learnt. I've put away regressive things, I've put away transgressive things, and I'm now doing something new. Musically, however, what I wanted to do is I wanted to kind of talk about the journey, and I wanted to be a bit cyclical about it, about kind of, you know, this kind of like this cycle and understanding that I went on this big journey, but in the end I can go right back and then just sort of put all that off the table and start again. So what I did was I took a whole lot of the different parts of the songs, and I, after I'd done the reincarnation song itself, I then took small pieces of all the songs and glued them together in this like 40-second going back through the song. So from reincarnation to Fourth Regression to Trepidation, Second Transgression, Second Transition, etc., right down and finishing with the big final riff of Regression to end up right back where we started, and then whoosh, everything is off the table. And that's where we end up back at the start, and we end up with track 12, Emancipation. And 2 things about this. The first thing is that 12 tracks, just like the Alcoholics Anonymous Suite. And I call it the Regression Suite. What are you going to do? But the Emancipation is me kind of going right back and taking those same ideas, that same riff, but playing it just acoustically, and really just playing around with that. But lyrically, to be able to say, you know, regression has no claim on me, and now that I'm new again, I won't run around to see. So I'm new. I've moved forward. And it's a beautiful way to finish the album, and I feel really pleased about it. Also, if you're listening to the album, especially on the Bandcamp one, like on YouTube it's a playlist, you can listen to the whole album, but on the Bandcamp one you can actually download it as one song, and it turns out to be 53 minutes and 23 seconds. So I wrote a 50-minute song. And it's great fun to listen to it all and to hear the themes moving around. And I don't expect you to get there, but if you do, I hope you enjoy listening to the whole thing. So it's on Bandcamp, it's on Spotify and iTunes and Deezer and Google Play, I think. It's on everywhere, so you should be able to stream it no problems, or download it on Bandcamp, or listen to it on YouTube and just stick the playlist on while you're doing something else and then listen to these different ideas. But I wanted to explain the album a little bit, and as I'm kind of putting more of them up on YouTube, I'll do a few more of these things and talk about sort of where albums come from, and just, you know, why I'm doing what I'm doing, and we'll just see how we go. But ultimately, I need to thank a few people. Okay, so I did all of the guitars, like all of them, and all of the all of the main vocals and a lot of the backing vocals, and I did all the bass work, and there's I think all the piano on the album I think I do as well, and some of it's me actually playing the piano, and some of it's me just programming things to play without me. But all of the drums on the album are done by my brother Bob, and it's extraordinary, the stuff that he's done. I basically give him songs and I say to him, play them in a way that no one could copy them from you. And so he always gives me these really full, really huge drum pieces which leave me kind of staggered. And he always comes up with much better ideas. I will give him ideas and say, do it like this. And sometimes you'll do it like that, and other times you'll just go, no, this one's better. And it always is. I had a spoken word piece at the end of the song Reincarnation, and I wanted it to be spoken in a particular kind of way, and my friend Jim, Darth Jim, from the States, is a guy I absolutely love, and famous person, historical person, living or dead throughout the entirety of history. If I was able to choose one person to have dinner with, it would be Jim, and he was able to record this piece for me, and I'm so glad that I could kind of have involved in this. It was really fun to get to do that. Also had a choir we were recording a different project, but I was able to snare this choir to just do some backing vocals for me, and it was Megan Grant, Susanna Graham and Karen Allen, three amazing singers who were able to jump in and kind of sing some backing vocals with me on the first Regression song, and that was really fun to do that. And then finally to Martin Galway, who at this stage, the stage of me recording this, he still doesn't know that there's an entire album based on a riff that he wrote for a Commodore 64 song in the very early 90s. And so, Martin, thank you, I love you, your music's incredible, and thank you for the riff that you don't know is here, but hey. Anyway, it's been so cool talking to you, and it's been so cool sharing this with you, and yeah, go and listen to the album.